Can anyone remember a time when reporters and journalists actually sought the truth? Believe it or not, the profession's entire purpose was originally just that. Their main mission was to accurately report on events and to hold those in power to account. By exposing the truth, no matter where it led, they reported the facts. Period. They bore witness and allowed the people to draw their own conclusions. They were intended to go in our stead. That's why the profession exists. We can't be everywhere at once and know everything that is happening. So we have professional people go to report on what is happening and to bring that information back to us. So why do we need them? Why not just have the police officer tell us what happened? Why not just have soldiers report the news from the front lines directly to us? For one, that's not their job. They have to actually do their job and not spend all their time, journaling and photographing what they did. Secondarily, though, and maybe the most important point, that would be a major conflict of interest. If the cop or the government official makes a mistake, do you really think they're going to ask themselves the hard questions and or self-report to the nation? If you believe that, I have some beachfront property on Mars I would like to sell you. The answer is no, by the way. So we send someone to get the truth. We send a fellow civilian, a professional, to report back to us. We want to be able to believe what they tell us, otherwise, why send them in the first place? Also, some of the places they go and the situations they go into, they can be pretty dangerous. So we need them to have integrity and bravery. When you take that into account and consider the profession as a whole, the fact that it requires both integrity and bravery, you can see how it would be considered an honorable profession, or at least it used to be. Speaking of honorable, before we get to current events, let me tell you a quick story about one of the most honorable reporters that have ever lived. Then we'll compare it and contrast it to what we see today. Joe Galloway, born Texas, November 1941, died August 2021, North Carolina. Joe began his career working for the Victoria Advocate in Victoria, Texas. It's a newspaper, probably a local one. Afterwards, he moved on to work for the United Press International, UPI. He was, in fact, working for UPI in Southeast Asia in 1965. 1965 was not a slow news year for Southeast Asia. Well, Joe was there to cover it regardless. At the time, he was a 24-year-old war correspondent for UPI. Joe volunteered for this assignment. He probably didn't really know what he was getting himself into exactly, but he was going to find out, not just for himself, but for us as well. So on 14 November 1965, in the Nha Trang Valley, Central Highlands, South Vietnam, Joe would get all the news that he could handle, and then some. This was the first major conflict between the U.S. military and the North Vietnamese Army, NVA. So to sum up the situation, Joe found himself in the U.S. Army 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, was sent to make contact with an NVA unit of unknown strength. Their mission was simple: find the enemy and kill him. This was the first time that the U.S. military would be using helicopters as an assault vehicle or an offensive transport, dropping troops into remote locations to make contact with the enemy. Joe knew the significance of what was happening and knew he needed to be there. He understood that this was a story that would need to be told. That's what he's there for. So Joe hopped on a Huey along with 7th Air Cav. The Battle of Nha Trang Valley would go down in history as arguably the battle that convinced Ho Chi Minh that he could actually win. It was a tactical victory for the United States, but it was a very costly one, and it was pretty hard fought. In fact, on the second day, 15 November, the Americans' lines were broken and they were almost overrun. Joe was there for that. So just before dawn at 06:20, an estimated 200 plus charged 1st and 2nd platoons of C Company on the south side of their perimeter in the valley. The NVA were soon within 75 yards of 1st Battalion's lines. Their fire actually began to cut through Charlie Company's positions and into the command post. So at 07:45, the NVA actually launched another assault from yet another direction. So this was now a 3-pronged attack on the American lines. Under heavy attack on 3 sides, the battalion repeatedly fought off numerous waves of NVA infantry. The 7th Cavalry's lines began to collapse in all directions. There was only so much they could take. The enemy units were working towards each other and forming a circle completely surrounding the Americans. And that circle was getting smaller by the second. The U.S. Air Force Forward Air Controller, the guy that was in charge of handling planes for close air support, was instructed by the leader of the battalion, whose name was Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, to transmit the code phrase "Broken Arrow." That relays that an American combat unit is in danger of being overrun. In so doing, Hastings, the radio operator, was calling on all available support aircraft in South Vietnam to come to the 7th Cav defense. Shortly afterwards, Moore's command post was subjected to a friendly fire incident as a result of the airstrikes. 2 F-100 Super Sabres that were called in to drop napalm on the attacking forces. Apparently they had the wrong idea of where the target was, mistakenly identified the command post in the center of the American lines as the enemy. Seeing the approaching F-100s that were about to drop their bombs directly into American positions, Hastings frantically radioed them to stop the attack. The pilot of the 2nd F-100 complied and disengaged, but the ordnance from the F-100 leader had already been dropped. The napalm canisters actually detonated within the command post, specifically the aid station where wounded soldiers were. Is pretty much a nightmare scenario. And enemy fire was still cutting through the command post, direct enemy fire. Bullets were still flying by. Joe Galloway was inside the command post perimeter, a short distance away from the literal wall of hellfire created by the twin napalm detonations. So Mr. Galloway and a medical aid man rose, braving enemy fire, and ran to the aid of the injured soldiers. The medical aid man was immediately shot and killed. He was the guy that was going with Galloway. He's gone. With the assistance from another soldier, Mr. Galloway carried one of the injured soldiers to the medical aid station that they had set back up in another location. This is directly from the citation. Mr. Galloway's valorous actions under enemy fire and his determination to get accurate, factual reports to the American people reflect great credit upon himself and American war correspondents. This picture behind me wasn't something I wrote. This is pulled directly from the citation that was awarded to him along with the Bronze Star with V for Valor. These are the photos that Joe took at Yadring Valley for those 3 days. He was a reporter, and he braved direct enemy fire, watched the soldier he was with get shot right in front of him, and still managed to pull another soldier to relative safety. Joe Galloway is the only civilian to receive the Bronze Star for combat valor for heroism in the Vietnam War from the U.S. Army. And here is a picture of Joe in 2006 in Iraq. Joe didn't have a quit button, apparently. Remember, we're not talking about a soldier here. Joe never served in the military. He was the guy we sent there to tell us what was happening. So I think it's safe to say that Joe proved his integrity and bravery, not only as a journalist, but on a personal level. So that is journalism at the height of its expression. Now that we've established the parameters of what we are looking for, compare and contrast to today. When you turn on Fox News or CNN, do you see any Joe Galloways? Do you see anything even remotely close to it? What about just journalistic integrity, period? And by journalistic integrity, I mean reporting the truth no matter where it leads or who it implicates. Is the government being held to account by your fellow civilian reporters? I'll just show you the evidence because it speaks for itself, and this is really recent. There's a lot more examples of this, but this is so blatant that I think it's important to see it. Here is a video of the government demanding a result from the press.
Without confirming the validity of the documents, this is information that has no business in the public domain. It has no business, if you don't mind me saying, on the pages of front pages of newspapers or on television. It is not intended for public consumption, and it should not be out there.
Okay, so if this little bureaucratic weasel was actually speaking to a room full of real journalists, you would have probably heard a room full of laughter. The idea that the government would try and tell an independent civilian what they can and can't report is laughable. Except I didn't hear any laughter. In fact, here's the result of said weasel's order. I give you Fox News.
National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Dana. The revelations have sent shockwaves through the Pentagon and the national security establishment, and sources tell me could be worse than the Edward Snowden leak because of the real-time effect on allies, their trust, and the war in Ukraine. Fox News has agreed, along with other news organizations, not to publish the leaked, highly classified documents which were discovered last week. Details about the scope and scale of the leak remain sparse.
Well, okay then. No bullets flying, no bombs exploding, and they still can't manage to show even an ounce of bravery. See, unlike the airmen that leaked the documents, these journalists don't owe the government anything. They have no responsibility to not share what they have. One might even say it is their duty to share it. They are us, remember, in our stead. I would like to know what the government is keeping from us. Personally, they work for us, don't they? I know they are going to classify stuff and compartmentalize it or whatever, but if the government fails to protect it and someone else gets their hands on that info, especially a reporter, I want to know what they know. I would think any real journalist would want to tell us what they found, right? Unless, of course, these journalists do owe something to those in power, which would mean that they are beholden to power. We have a word for that. It's called being compromised, as in no longer effective, no longer worthy of trust, no longer reporting the truth. And what do you call a reporter that only reports on what they are allowed to report on by the government? Well, since they're basically just mouthpieces for the government at that point, and, have sacrificed every single ounce of journalistic integrity they ever had, if they ever had any, we can't really call them reporters. They're doing a different job. If they're no longer telling the truth, then what are they reporting? If only we had a word for that, huh? How much more proof do you need? They're literally doing it right in front of you. And don't give me any of that responsible reporting crap. Journalistic integrity doesn't have a subsection governing what information I can or can't handle. They are there to report the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Anything other than that, well, it ain't journalism. It's something else entirely. Good day.